Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Planning Commission podcast. Today's episode, Crikey, I'm Lonely, with Jennifer Kent, Senior Research Fellow from the University of Sydney School of Architecture, Design, and Planning.
The Planning Commission podcast is a discussion you never even knew you needed. Sit back, join us for a conversation between a couple of old friends and their guests to talk about all the things that are happening in this wide-ranging profession called planning. Our views are our own and don't reflect those of any national planning organizations or any particular public agencies and only belong to us. So read your commission packet, know your Robert's rules, and enjoy this, the Planning Commission podcast.
Commissioners, let's take roll. Commissioner Minshaw, are you here?
Present.
And Commissioner Kostelek.
Present. Point of clarification. University of Sydney, where?
Australia.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
You're right. I guess I'm sorry. In my moment of panic, I'm going, did I miss something? I figured that, I guess, is there a University of Sydney like in Tennessee or something? Like our American audience? Maybe there
I
is.
just figure also honoring, I think, our first international guest.
That's true. We're going global. We're going global. So here we are. All right. Our agenda items today, our discussion item, our whiskey pairing, our interview, and our lightning round. Commissioners, can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Wonderful. All approved. Let's move forward. So to our audience, just as a reminder, you can find all our past meetings on our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. Head over to YouTube, Amazon, and Apple. Please subscribe, like, and give us feedback. Email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. Commissioners, I believe today's subject is without a doubt one that either one of two or three that's going to, if it already isn't, rising to the top of what we do in a way that is hitting us in ways I don't think we've really discussed and thought about as planners very much. And that's the concept of loneliness, mental health, and all of the things that come from it, including the physical reactions to loneliness. And if you don't think that that's a real issue, and I know both of you do, but to our audience, if you're thinking, what are they talking about now? Let me just read a little excerpt. This is from our U.S. Surgeon General, who just released a pretty sizable report and a call to action on this topic. And just let me give you just one quick second here of his words. Loneliness is far from more than a bad feeling. It harms both individual and societal health. It is associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day, and even greater than that associated with obesity and physical activity. And the Surgeon General goes on and on in a well-done report. And APA also put out a call for what's emerging as a topic in 2024, to their credit, and may cover that in a minute too. But wow, here we are. We're coming out of the pandemic, right? We're well out of it now, but here's one of those residual effects, and everybody felt it. So to my fellow commissioners, let's get this episode kicked off with, I hope, a provocative question. Are you lonely? And if you're lonely, does the planned built environment around us have some effect? How? I'm really hoping our listeners are contemplating that right now as they're walking on a treadmill, or actually, I hope they're not walking on a treadmill. I hope they're walking in their neighborhood, getting a little bit of vitamin N and interacting with people and contemplating this. So to my two fellow commissioners, do you have an answer? If so, go.
I think I'm coming out of a phase of that. I think with COVID, and even just the example of you and I, Commissioner Danley, of being in a conjoined office space, despite, working from home the last few years since COVID, and just that dynamic of being back downtown Boise, where we are, seeing people on the streets that we've worked with over the years, going to get coffee, going to get lunch, and really realizing for the last 3+ years haven't had that on a daily basis, and certainly just between us as business partners not having the FaceTime. So yeah, I think it's emerging from that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think for me at least, it goes through cycles, right? I'm only, let's just say, a year and a half, 2 years from just recently being empty nester. So going from having so much of your life focused on your children, to when at 19 she moved out, came back, moved out again. But just that shift in dynamics of your own personality and who you are. I think I am blessed that I always thought it would be better to work more remote, but now that I'm in an office in a very group setting, I realized how much that interaction I would have missed and did for a period when I was working at home. Um, I also feel like I'm lucky that, so many of us, and I know we'll talk about this in the built environment with our guests, but so many of us, at least in the US, you drive up, you drive right into your garage, it goes open, you pull your car in, it goes down, you don't see your neighbors. That's really easy to happen, except we happen to live in a cul-de-sac. And it's one of the greatest things we love in the neighborhood. And what's kept us from moving is everybody's out in the cul-de-sac, whether it's kids playing in the yard,
Mhm.
neighbors are standing out
Mhm.
there. So you really like can't pull in without waving at one of them because they have to move out of the road. Um, and I just realized how blessed we are with that. That kind of connection doesn't happen in every neighborhood anymore from the way it's built. And I know y'all
Yeah.
don't love cul-de-sacs, but one of the benefits is people do play in the street still.
I no, I totally understand that, and that's a different debate. But understand the social interaction that does occur in a space that doesn't have the through traffic threat and that sort of thing. Different discussion, but I totally understand that. I was working in Arizona over the last year in a large, very large city just outside of Phoenix. And man, what you just said is exactly what they said, which was, in fact, one person I interviewed who was the head of the realtor association down there said, we've been in our house for 10 years and I don't even know my neighbor right next door. And said that exact thing of garage goes up, car goes in, garage goes down, stay inside, have our little island of isolation, and off we go. And man, what a picture that paints, right? Um, I'm not afraid to say this, and I think that this is one of the things that I really hope that our chat here, APA, the Surgeon General, continues to provide confidence to us to be able to say, and that is, yeah, I am lonely, and one of the biggest reasons is exactly what you just described, Sabrina. My neighborhood changed dramatically over particularly the last 8 to 10 years, where we had an incredibly vibrant neighborhood and we led the charge, man. We had garage parties and driveway party all the time, every weekend, always out fun, throwing darts and listening to music, whatever it was, themed nights, having people bring food that had to do with a certain city and whatever it took. And that was wonderful. And then people started to move, and the replacement was with 2 generations older because the price of housing was so exorbitant. And now here we are. And even at the age of 46, I look around and frankly, all my neighbors, or most all of them anyway, are on average pushing 70 and above. And that's great, but we don't have anything in common and they don't really come out. So that's been a big factor. And to Don's point of us recently, very recently, moving into a new office space. Thankfully, I like coffee. So man, going out repeatedly and tapping that vein of coffee, like just to get that social interaction buzz, it's nice to see people and have conversations, right? It does literally and figuratively fill your cup, and I'm happy for it. So
Well, you mentioned the
um
housing thing and affordability, and I know in our housing work and analysis, one of the things is because of housing cost is that younger people, young professionals are not getting into housing as early in terms of the ownership track, and they're renting for longer. And just by nature, you're going to be more transient in that environment in terms of either even within the same region or city, going from rental to rental versus establishing in a neighborhood, maybe with like-minded, like-aged people, and
mhm.
having that. So I could see that going back to the built environment piece having an effect. And I know our guest today, the rental housing piece was part of their research and understanding the impacts
Yeah.
it has on loneliness.
A few years ago, I testified in front of an audience of elected officials about a neighborhood, and that at that point of time, the reality was that a neighborhood, the statistics were it turned over every 7 years on average. Obviously, there's outliers, but 1 in 7 homes turned over at that point. You know what it is now? It's exceeding 25 years. The amount of people who are moving out of a neighborhood, and because of all these compounding issues with housing costs, et cetera, that turnover rate has plummeted. So it doesn't bring in sort of that new juice, if you will. And it's a real factor, man. To the point where, what did APA say about this? So they talked about significantly the US Surgeon General has prioritizing combating loneliness. So telling us as planners, man, let's help you. We need your help. His proposed framework highlights the importance of the built environment and fostering social connection, emphasizing the role of planning. U.S. mayors are increasingly recognizing the need to prioritize mental health alongside physical well-being, and planners play a pivotal role. Thank you very much, APA, for pointing that out. So here we are. We're, once again, sort of being asked to do something about it. And our guest, who we will bring on momentarily, is doing incredible research that showcases the effects and what can be done to make this a better day. So, all right, very good. Good discussion. Let's move on to the whiskey pairing. Don, what do you have? And does that whiskey improve your social standing, or does it isolate people because of how you react to it? What does it do?
I think it depends on the time of day and the venue.
Right.
For that. I think for this one, especially guests from down under, I have been fascinated by the prospects of the whiskey industry in Tasmania, in Australia, and have tried to coax people I've known to go there to bring some back. So we're going to go with that. Lark, which is a single malt whiskey made in that region of Australia. I don't know much about it, would love to taste it, but there we go. If you don't know of some of the budding whiskey regions around the world because of climate and other things that are similar to Scotland and others, Australia is trying to grow that.
Is the E present in whiskey, or is it absent in the spelling of?
Let's see. It is absent.
Oh,
It's absent.
so it's
Yes,
going the
yes,
way of
yes.
the good Scots. Okay. All right.
I would say back to our neighborhood that the irony of that as it turns over in connection related to whiskey is I came home, I'd been visiting my child in a different state, and I came home and there was 3 new bottles of whiskey on our counter. And I asked my husband, like, where did these come from? And apparently it was a random thing that like 4 or 5 of the guys all got each other whiskey and nobody talked ahead of time. And so they all had exchanged whiskey and bought whiskey for each other because that's what they would show up at each other's house with. So it was just ironic that there is a pairing with how people can be social, even if the people don't drink, they
Wow.
with whiskey. So
Well, Sabrina, I'm
you want to
46,
live
but
in my neighborhood, don't you?
I'm still eligible to be adopted, right?
Okay.
I don't forfeit that right. So if you
I
want
do have
to,
I have RV parking on the side for you, Chris.
I was just going to say that the lack of the E, maybe it shows Australia's continued commitment to the monarchy, which I didn't know how maybe on the precipice that was in the past until I started watching The Crown. And
I don't know.
things like that. So
It's the umbilical cord to the motherland in a long way. It's been a couple hundred years, I think, but there's still an attachment there. So, all right, we need to stop yapping and bring on our guest, for crying out loud. She's yeah, we'll get into how wonderful Jennifer is in just a minute. But real quick, all right, we would like to take a quick moment to thank our friends at Plan Edison for supporting today's podcast. If you're looking to sharpen your urban planning skills and advance your planning career, head on over to Plan Edison Courses, which offers 300 courses on cutting-edge planning topics and skills such as parking reform, missing middle housing, equity analysis, and climate resilience. Visit courses.planedison.com/PC10 to take advantage of an exclusive offer for Planning Commission podcast listeners. Okay. Enough of us yammering on and on. Let's interview our wonderful guest, Dr. Jennifer Kent, Senior Research Fellow at the University of Sydney, Australia, School of Architecture, Design, and Planning. Dr. Jennifer Kent, I know you rather go by Jennifer, but welcome to the Planning Commission podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Oh, it's our pleasure. So I would consider you, I mean, in our research anyway, you're top of the heap when it comes to people on this planet, frankly, who know this subject of loneliness and the built environment and the planning game and kind of how we can do great things. So I appreciate you being up nice and early where you are, right? And joining us to have a good discussion. So let's just start with you. your background, how you became interested in this subject, social connectedness, urban planning. I mean, it's kind of two unusual things. At least it was 10 years ago, and now it's not so unusual. But tell us all about that journey for you.
Yeah, sure. So I started out actually with my studies doing environmental science, and through that became really interested in human geography and the links between place and people, basically. When I went on to do my PhD, I worked as a planner for a little bit here in Australia in local government, also in consultancy, and was just becoming increasingly frustrated with the disconnect, I think, between what the legislation and the policy was telling us and what was actually being experienced on the ground. So I went on to do a PhD and aligned myself with an academic at the University of New South Wales here, Professor Susan Thompson, who has really pioneered this link between health and built environments and urban planning in the Australian context. So that was my first sort of interest, I suppose, was wanting to just unpick this relationship between people and place, and specifically, people's experience of health. I mean, that is the fundamental experience of the built environment. If we can't plan built environments to keep people healthy, then what on earth are we doing? When I first started looking at this, though, I was more interested in the ways that built environments impact physical health. So things like the ways that we can plan our cities to support physical activity, recreation, to support access to healthy food and support the preparation of healthy food within the home and that kind of thing. I became very interested in transport as a way to encourage physical activity, and also from there, the connections that people have. So the ways our transport systems can enable connections. And I suppose from there, it wasn't such a jump to start looking at the built environment and mental health as well. So I became very interested in how our built environments can facilitate just these incidental social interactions. And how our transport systems can encourage that as well. And since that time, as you said, Chris, I'm really, really glad that you gave that introduction about what the Surgeon General has released and the APA. We're having similar sorts of figures coming out here in Australia. The interest in the built environment and loneliness has really risen. And what I find interesting is we used to talk about built environments and urban planning as related to social connections and interactions and that kind of thing. And now we've got an actual medical condition, loneliness, as a term to put onto that. So I think that's really quite powerful in bringing urban planners in as a way to address this issue. Now, I guess from there, I've been doing research on built environments and physical activity and so forth. And then I decided to interrogate this a bit more, went over to some folks in our psychology faculty here at University of Sydney and spoke to them and said, can you tell me more about this condition of loneliness? And of course, they were very interested because they were very, familiar with the social determinants of health and the ways that our cities can impact health. So they were very interested in talking to me as well. And from there, we struck up this relationship and decided to embark on what became a very long and arduous journey of doing a systematic review of the impacts of the built environment on loneliness. And that's where I am today.
So we talked a bit about our own experiences with loneliness and how that feels, but tell us more about what the research found. How persuasive is the problem, and why does it matter? What were really the things that you were starting to see in your research that made people realize there's real physical impacts?
Yeah, sure. So I think to explain the links between loneliness and our health, as the Surgeon General's report said, people with loneliness, it's almost as risky as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So to explain how that link happens, I think I can use a bit of a personal example that's happened to me just recently, actually. One of my neighbours is having some trouble with her husband has cancer, and she is really struggling through this. She doesn't mind me talking about this. And just the other day, I bumped into her on the street and we met and we had a great chat, and she downloaded onto me some of the things she was experiencing, and I was able to just listen and offer that ear of help. Now, while that was going on, my system was being flooded with endorphins. I was getting, you know, the oxytocin hits of that feeling that you get when you really connect with somebody. Now, that's really good for my immune system, and it's really good for my health. She would have been having a similar experience, I hope. But let's take it a step further than that. The fact that she was able to spot somebody in her neighborhood that she could talk about something that was quite personal to her means that she feels like she's comfortable to reach out to somebody if she's in a situation where she needs help. Now, so going beyond that personal experience of the endorphin release and so forth, you're also, by enabling connections within your neighborhood, you're allowing people to speak out about what is going on for them. And of course, that feels good, but it also means that if we are having problems, we don't keep it to ourselves. We reach out, we become familiar with that process of reaching out, which might mean that we go and seek medical care. It might mean that we go and talk to other people about what's going on with us. So if we're socially disconnected, we feel less inclined to go out and seek help for some kind of physical ailment. So the impact really goes from internally within the body to that external capacity that we have to seek help when we need it. Now, there are other links. For example, I was out and about in my neighborhood, right, which meant I'd been going for a walk. Now, I feel safe to go for a walk. It means I'm engaging in physical activity, which, as we know, is a huge risk factor for disease, for physical inactivity. So there's all those multifaceted reasons as to why loneliness is really bad for us, physically and mentally.
I think back to Sabrina's example of the kids in the cul-de-sac and transitioning to how built environment is contributing to this. I go back to just thinking of how play streets in cities were a much more common theme, even within a grid system, not that many decades ago until this auto dominance. So maybe it's not that the cul-de-sac is the best place for it. We just shifted culturally in a lot of ways. So how does that built environment piece specifically contribute to loneliness, social isolation, all those factors?
Oh gosh, Don, like you've just hit on something that I'm really passionate about, and that is the implication of the private car and all of this. So, I mean, it's not necessarily just a cultural shift that is disabled those play streets. It's the fact that our street speeds are high. Our streets are actually not considered public spaces. They're considered spaces for the car. And it's downright dangerous for our kids to be out there playing in a lot of streets. You know, unless you have that motivation of the cul-de-sac where you literally have to slow your car down because the street doesn't continue. You know, the private car, its influence on this sense of disconnection and this sense of us having to retreat into our private realm in so many different ways, it can't be overestimated how important the car is in that. But there's lots of other ways that the built environment can facilitate what I call incidental social interactions, or what's called in the literature. So sociologists have long thought about the different kinds of interactions and relationships that we have in our lives, and there's kind of a hierarchy. So at the top, you've got your close family, your spouse, children, etc. That broadens out to a small group of friends that you might have, which then broadens out to people that you perhaps work with, or a larger group of friends. A group of friends, say you were having a party for 100 people, they're the kinds of people that you might invite. Then you have people that you have common interests with. So you might bump into them at different sporting events and that kind of thing. But outside of all of that are these things called incidental social interactions. Now, this is just the meeting, greeting, acknowledging of people that you live around and work around, the people that you might see on the bus on a regular basis, the person that you might see passing you walking their dog, you know, the person that you might see at the shops on a regular basis. And research has shown that those kinds of interactions, when they're convivial, can really be just as safeguarding about two experiences of loneliness as some of the closer ones that we have, because it's about making you feel like you're connected and you belong within the neighborhood. And that's where I think the built environment can be really, really instrumental, is facilitating those interactions and, importantly, making sure they're tension-free and convivial. So things like giving people a place to talk, I think there's a quote by the famous urban designer William H. White, and I'm not going to try and do it word for word, but he basically says that the one angle that architects most regularly forget about is the angle of the human backside. And he used that to point out that in built environments, we've got to give people a place to sit down if we want them to linger anywhere. You know, it's as simple as providing adequate and adequately structured seating for people to be able to sit and just enjoy the environment around them and have those social interactions with the people around them. So, I mean, it goes on and on. It's about providing recreational environments. It's about providing places for people to use active transport. Walkability supports those social interactions. But one of the things I find really interesting and quite important in this space is that there's two sides of the coin to loneliness, right? So there's that idea that we go out and we have those interactions. But to be able to feel comfortable with that, we also need to give people a space to retreat and have privacy. Because if we feel like we're on show in public all the time, we don't have that sense of wanting to go out and connect and interact. So when you think about the way our society has changed and is structured, increasingly in cities, we're densifying. I know that's definitely happening here in Australia because we've got a growing population. So we're increasingly asking people to live in apartment buildings where they don't have as much privacy as they would in a detached dwelling. We're increasingly asking people to hot desk, taking away that sense of your own private realm in the workplace. We're asking people to use public transport, again, taking away that opportunity to retreat and have time out in your car. And because we're doing all of those things, I wonder whether that is contributing to our sense of withdrawal from society in general. We just feel like we're on show too much. One of the areas that I think we really need to do research in is what's the impact of social media on that? The fact that we're spending hours and hours in our own little echo chambers. So there's lots of different aspects to it.
So there's so much to unpack there. You know, first of all, with regard to the social media aspect, I mean, literally today in our country, the heads of many of the social media networks, including Meta X, are all on Capitol Hill getting totally grilled by the senators. And it all had to do with the impact on young people in particular, you know. And so it's interesting. I don't, did Australia experience the phenomenon of Pokemon Go?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, some time
So
ago.
right. So for a brief moment, I think
Mm.
us planners were going, there's nothing that we can do to recreate, all these people hitting the streets. And now granted, they were all looking through a phone to do it, but we're kind of going, well, at least they're moving, you know? So yeah, gosh, even in the sense like what technology plays a role on both sides of this. One of the things I wanted to make sure, I think we'd be remiss when I set this episode up about this being a sort of a newer concept. I don't know that it's a newer concept because I do think when you go back and look at Dr. Richard Louv, for example, Last Child in the Woods, or you look at Putnam, Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam, and the subtitle, The Collapse and Revival of American Community, but the header of Bowling Alone, right? This isolation. I mean, those were seminal pieces that were written, 20, 25 years ago. And so it's only been exacerbated by the pandemic, I think, it would be fair to say that. My question is coming up in a minute, but one last thing is, um, convivial. That's the word 2024, no doubt. That's it. That's it, man. You don't know this, but Don and I are in the midst of drafting a plan for one of our major cities in this city or in this state. Oh, buddy, that's going in there. That's definitely going in there because that's the whole point. And it summarizes our desire as humans to be around one another. But that particular piece and that particular word, I think, hit it right on the head. So that's a lot of talking. I want to ask you a question. The question is this: existing current planners and the next generation, that young generation that's either just hitting the workforce or still in college, how do we move the needle? How do we improve this? What would your advice be to them on at least, two or three main sort of approaches that they could take to their craft to try to improve social isolation and get convivial to happen more often?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just on that convivial thing, it comes from the origin of the word, right? Which in Latin is con and viva, like with life, with together, with people. So if, as I said before, if planning is about anything, it's got to be about that, right? And we go back to the origins of planning. They were always in the health area, you know, trying to separate polluting lands from where people lived. Fundamental planning conundrum. It's all about human health. So you're right, Chris, in that we've been talking about this sort of stuff since planning began. And a lot of this stuff is the accepted wisdom that we know as planners. It's just that we've now got some great labels to put against it, I think. In terms of, you know, the bare basics of what I could say to emergent planners and, you know, what I say to my postgraduates and things like that, don't lose focus on protecting public open spaces in cities. So increasingly, and it just really pains me when we see the provision of public open space whittled down for the, you know, being taken over by residential uses, commercial uses, and so forth. That is the gold of, I think, of encouraging these incidental interactions. Because if we are crowded in with built form and don't maintain public open space, we're really going to be struggling to make people's lives convivial, you know, to make these connections tension-free, because we're going to be overcrowded, basically. The other thing is that public open spaces are often green spaces, and there is this fundamental connection between greenery and nature and mental health. And that contributes again to our ability to connect with those around us. You know, there are so many links between natural spaces and health. I won't go into them all here, but if we can protect public open spaces and make sure that some of them at least are natural spaces, we're really going pretty far. The second thing is making sure that those public open spaces are designed to give people somewhere to talk. Like I was saying, provision of seating. And often it's good to give people something to talk about, you know, whether that's a dog park. You know, dogs are the fundamental social lubricant in a lot of built environments. And we know that communities that have a lot of dogs in them are more convivial communities. And there's so much that planners can do to support companion animal ownership. Providing dog parks is one of those things. There's other things that you can provide people, things to talk about, you know, whether it be a tree going from summer to fall and it's just got beautiful leaves in it. Paying attention to those real details of the built environment is important, and planners can't lose sight of that, I think. The final, I mean, you asked for three, the final thing that I would recommend is to take community consultation really, really seriously, because you are not going to feel like you belong in an area, like you're safe in that area, and like you want to talk to the people around you if you feel like you've got zero control over what happens. So community consultation is not just about ticking a box, for sure. It's not even just about getting community input into what's going on. It's about keeping people healthy, safe, and belong and have that sense of belonging to where they live. So don't underestimate the importance of that as a process to accomplish what planning is trying to accomplish.
So Jennifer, I mean, you brought up some great points about nature being part of it, right? And you also said this isn't a new thing, right? I mean, there's great books, Richard Louv, The Nature Principle. You know, wonder how public art plays in, all those things to talk about. But where have you seen in your research or even just in your travels where it was done very intentionally? It was done intentionally where the things you're talking about, community consultation and how we're doing that was focused. Have you seen places that are great? I mean, the APA article talks about Barcelona, but what about even different size places?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, Sabrina. And as you're asking it, I'm thinking, we haven't really done it yet. As planners, you know, we can draw up great examples like Barcelona. I mean, the Scandinavians are always so far ahead in all of this stuff. It's almost like we stop talking about them because they just know what they're doing. But I think that brings up a really good point, that there is no blueprint right? There is no sort of thing that you can lay over a city or an urban area and say, this is what we need to do here. This is what they did in Barcelona. It's going to work in Boise, or it's going to work in Sydney, because context is just so important with all of this stuff. Context, going everything from the climate to the history to people's experiences to the transience of the area really shapes the kind of response that we do. So while I can draw on some places where they have, you know, intentionally provided green open space and so forth, I don't think it's really been done as a way to overcome loneliness. But B, you can't just look at what other cities are doing and say, yep, that's what we'll do here, because you're not really bringing the community along with you then, and you're also going to not get the outcome that you want, I think. There are jurisdictions which have gone a really long way to get this stuff integrated into policy. So Wales, for example, has a commissioner for loneliness there who comments on, you know, everything from development applications to strategic plans to what the public health system is doing. I think having someone with that overarching responsibility for loneliness gives us, you know, a sense of accountability, and also just raises awareness of the issue. But again, I mean, little old Wales, they are forging through with so much of this stuff. Last October, they implemented a 20-mile-per-hour default urban street speed. And the reason that they did that, because it saves lives. You know, the slower cars are driving, the less likely somebody is to die if they get hit. But the main reason they did it was to encourage walking and cycling and getting people out and about in the neighborhood. And that is just so progressive. I'm so impressed with that. And, you know, we're not there yet here in Australia.
I just want a quick follow-up is to your point. Like, I know in our city code, it drives me absolutely crazy that we have a provision that development set aside 10% for quote unquote open space. The medians, if you have a tree median that's 5 feet wide, right? If you have enough of them and it cumulatively adds up to 10%, there's your open space.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
and you're going, no, there
The
is
interior of a roundabout counts
I
towards
have-
your open space calculation.
I have been begging our staff to go, there is a difference between open space and green space, and maybe even a different, I don't even know if I'd call it that, but you get what I'm saying, a vegetation area versus the ability to move your body in a space and encounter.
Yeah.
So details like that really matter. I know Dawn has a
Well,
question.
Oh, no, I just want to, if I could,
Yeah,
on that
please.
point, Chris, I mean, you can go to your authorities and say, there is empirical evidence that a city needs 30% public open space to get the health outcomes that we're after to address some of these chronic non-communicable diseases. So 10%, that's just, it's not cutting it, you know?
Right.
Or I
Sorry,
think
Don.
of the one, it was Chris made the point I was going to make. If you're out there in zoning land, and what can you do immediately? Look at your code, and if it allows that to happen, work to get rid of it. That's pretty simple. I know the other one we just scoff at is subdivisions where the stormwater pond doubles as the playground, because that's how they met their quota for it, and why not? And it's a 2 to 5 year old tot lot, and that's it. So I was a couple of weeks ago, I saw a short film called The Extinction of Up, and you can find it on YouTube. And it's in this work society of the future where everybody is so tied to their mobile phones that they don't recognize people by their faces or voices. They recognize them by their shoes. And that's kind of definitely a commentary of where we've come from, especially in the last decade. So where are we headed, Jennifer? What does the future look like? How do we not become a society that is so fixated on our phones we only know people by the shoes they wear?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess if I could answer that question succinctly, I'd probably be, you know, doing it, making a lot more money. But I think it's like all of the grand challenges that we're facing, you know, climate change, for example. We need big shakeups to what's happening in our society. Otherwise, it's going to start shaking us up, you know, without us having control over. I think that I think that we have come a long way, though, in the last 5 years of at least raising awareness of loneliness as an issue. But I think we need to be careful that it's not just us preaching to the converted. We need to make sure that we're getting out there and making sure that this message is across the board in the community, making sure that we're able to talk about these kinds of things in a way where we feel safe and it's normal. It's as normal to talk about having a diagnosis of depression as it is to talk about having a common cold. I think that we have come a long way with that in certain areas in society because of the pandemic and so forth. But I do worry that it is a niche area, and it's the kinds of people that I talk to and hang out with, and probably you guys as well, that we need to broaden out that message somehow. But like Chris was saying, like you said, Don, as planners, we can just go through our codes and the different plans that we have and point out those real inconsistencies. Because even though we've got policies that might be heading in one direction, our plans are still drawing us back in the other direction. And there are so many instances of where that happens. It's just that basic fundamental going through and saying, hey, this is not only bad for our environment, it's not bad, it's bad economic policy, it's really bad for our health. Bring up the children. It's bad for the children. That, I think, is a really key message that planners need to get on board with and start seeing as within their remit is public health. And it can give them so much more power.
Well, I
So
see it. When we
roundabout
first started
comment.
doing the health impact assessment work and kind of thinking about reintegrating health back into planning, one of the things we saw is really in the US, especially, our planning codes are based on our health problems in 1900. It's
Yeah.
sanitary water, sanitary sewer, and overcrowding. And I would say we've not evolved much from then to look at the health issues of 2024. And maybe those setbacks don't matter anymore the way they did. We certainly want to keep sanitary water and sewer, but our codes haven't modernized themselves. That's what I would say to that. Sabrina?
Yeah, I was just curious. I was thinking of an example, and I don't know if this is the case, Jennifer, in Australia, but we get excited as planners about mixed use design, where there's commercial aspects and commercial nodes, and then you have residential. And then we look at it and there's no connection between, right? You would have walking longer because you have to go all the way around the neighborhood to actually get to something that is right behind you. How do you address things like that for the people who aren't converted, right? I mean, because some of that comes from a place of fear of, oh no, I don't want that connection between my houses because it's going to bring other people into our neighborhood versus it's your neighborhood walking to that grocery store that's right behind you. I mean, how would you approach that resistance to the change of thinking about it differently?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? When we try to, one of the biggest challenges that we face as planners is retrofitting existing urban form, but we've got to think also that we're retrofitting existing communities as well. So I think the key with that is bringing the community along with you. Like I said before, taking that community consultation really seriously and respecting their resistance and respecting some of the fears that they have and taking the time to explain, well, look, I know that this is scary and the change is hard, but these are all the benefits that you can get from this. The other thing I think is making sure that those benefits are really obvious to people. So often we sort of just plan something and we know why we did it, but we don't really make it clear to other people why we did it. So something in that case is as simple as signage and just saying, shops this way can give people that sense of, oh yeah, this environment is legible to me. I know how to behave in this environment, and I am reassured that this way of behaving is actually a good thing for me and for my community. So those simple little details, I think, are really important there.
So, Jennifer, last question before we grill you on nonsensical questions in the lightning round. But, you've been involved in this work for quite some time, and you have rolled your sleeves up and really got down into it with the research. And I think I'm guessing it's has to have affected you in a number of ways personally. And so I'm just curious, what are some examples, some changes that you've made, or maybe things you're just much more aware of, whatever those types of effects might be. I'm wondering what those are and how has it changed you for the positive or maybe not so positive?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of the community interactions and conviviality, I think I've always had this really innate sense that it's important to connect to the people around where I live. And, you know, like you were saying, Chris, you were one of the champions of this in your neighborhood previously. I am one of the champions of getting together in our neighborhood. You know, we do have things out on the verge, and we do try to get people with kids together down at the playground as much as we possibly can, and, you know, setting up WhatsApp groups and all of that kind of stuff. I think that what this work has done has made me more passionate about that. And, you know, sometimes when I might be getting a bit lazy and going, oh, I couldn't be bothered to set up that neighborhood drinks, going, no, this is really, really important stuff. We've got to do this. I think the other interesting thing, though, is I've, while doing this, you know, become a mum. And I think that this work has really made me realize how different contexts in people's lives really matter. That, you know, we're not just talking about people, we're talking about people going through the different ebbs and flows of their lives, and the kind of stuff that they're going to want in their built environment is going to be different through those transitions. So there's two examples, but I love my work. So I think it's
Good.
effective
There you
that
go.
way. Keeps me happy.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, my goodness, what a great discussion, and we appreciate it so much. And your research on this, I know, is just going to continue to grow, and hopefully the word spreads far and wide, because we have to get something done on this. But now it's time to grill you. And real quick, I just will say, you know, you live in such a wonderful place. I got a wonderful 3 weeks of my life in Brisbane. And the second half of that 3 weeks, we did nothing. I was in the military, so we had a chance to go to a rainforest in the Gold Coast, and so much fun. I recall those days, and the first half flying overnight and coming back towards the airport there where we were landing, and having to call ahead so that the guy could go out on a pickup truck and shoo all the kangaroos off the runway, because they were like big cats and they just wanted to stay nice and warm. And seeing the koala in the tree line through our cameras inside our plane, which I won't talk any more about that, but you get the gist of it. It was such a wonderful place. So I have 20 something years of at least a few stored up Australia questions that I have to ask, in addition to maybe some of the personal ones. First one on the spot. Here we go. Crocodile Dundee, national embarrassment or iconic pride?
Oh, look, it's two sides of the same coin, Chris. It was the 80s. Come on, give us a break, you know.
Hey, you didn't do anything. We're the knuckleheads who made the movie, I think. And, you know, and
Oh,
I don't know how accurate it was,
And
but
watched the movie. We also watched the movie.
yeah,
So we
yeah,
get it.
yeah.
oh, we watched it in droves, you know, and Paul
Yeah?
Hogan, he is he's a source of national pride. Not
Yeah,
sure about the
yeah,
work
yeah.
he's done, but yeah.
It's not John Wayne. Wait, no, wait, that was the other.
It was quite the movie, right? And I think they went on to make at least 2 more or something. So, you know, doing
Yeah.
something right. All right, my second question before passing the baton. AC/DC, Kylie Minogue, or Keith Urban? Who are you having a beer with?
Oh God. Sorry. Blasphemy. I have to go with AC/DC there. Otherwise my
There you go.
would literally
See,
divorce
I would
me.
say King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. That's my
geez.
favorite Australian
Who?
band.
Who?
King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard.
One more time?
King Gizzard and the Lizard
Okay.
Wizard. Last October 2023, they released 3 albums in 1 month.
Okay.
That's-
So we'll
yeah.
give you a break, Jennifer. You do not have to know who that is. So you talked a lot about walking around. What's the strangest thing you ever saw walking down the street in your area?
Oh gosh. We have these things called bush turkeys, which is sort of like
That's different than a regular turkey.
well, they kind of look like a homeless turkey, right? They're just rough around the edges. And they normally just stick to bush areas, but as increasingly, you know, we're urbanizing our cities, they've started just coming out there, and I'll see them just walking up my street, literally in the middle of the street. It's just a bizarre thing to see a turkey going up
That is
the
bizarre.
street.
In our
Hmm.
area, there's actually domesticated turkeys. So that tells you what happens on our side. There's actually like pet turkeys.
A pet turkey.
Yeah, my
Wow.
husband went to a call. He was in law enforcement, went to a call because there was turkeys in the road and 3 or 4 people had called and he went out there and they just came right up to him and the owner came out. He's like, "Oh, sorry, they got out." It's like,
I think bush turkey would be a good well whiskey from Australia to kind of go against
or
our
for a
wild
band
turkey.
or a
Ooh,
band
yeah,
name.
yeah.
The
Yeah.
bush turkey.
All right, I have
So-
one more easy one for you
Mhm.
before we give it to Dawn. So I do notice with the time difference, but we also have season differences. Behind you, it's all sunny. What's the weather like there? Because it's cold and gray here almost all of January and February. So give us some insight of it looks
Oh,
beautiful.
nice and
Okay,
warm.
my conversions to Fahrenheit aren't great, so I'm just going to do degrees Celsius. Today it's 28 degrees Celsius, perfect blue sky out there. One thing
That's
I will
warm.
complain about though, the humidity has been a bit of a killer this summer. We're in an El Nino, so we're expecting a really hot, dry summer, but we've come with a fairly humid kind of a summer. And I think the other day it was 9 on 100% humidity, which is hard going.
Wow. Yeah,
So
because
yeah,
that's like 82, 83 degrees. So that's nice and warm.
yeah, yeah.
I was thinking on the picture side, like I've got pictures of well done curb ramps and things, as Jennifer have pictures of anti-loneliness infrastructure as you travel.
Oh, yeah, I do actually. I do like taking pictures of, good public art. But one thing I've been photographing lately, which I think is, it's a really interesting little anecdote. We've got I live on a bay, and down at the bay we've got these gorgeous luminescent bugs that have just appeared in the trees, and they're tiny, like the size of a fingernail, and I sort of started looking at them, and you have to really look into the trees to see them. And then I started to notice that other people were doing the same things. And it looks kind of weird. Like you just see all these people just looking at the trees for these amazing looking bugs. And I've taken a lot of photos of those and tried to not freak people out, but tried to take photos of people looking at these bugs, because it's just an example of how nature brings us together. And it's those talking points, gives us something to talk about.
So
That might need to be a planning commission podcast like challenge. What's the
pictures.
strangest pictures you're
Ooh,
taking
yeah.
while you're out visiting as a planner?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So you were a professional cyclist, right?
Yep. Yep. I did not mention that, but yep.
What's the craziest professional ride that you did? And where was it?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So you might have heard of the men's Giro d'Italia, or maybe not. It's the Italian equivalent of the Tour de France, and they have a women's Giro d'Italia. And the Italians, they have weird time things happening. And you always start a big tour. Well, usually you start a big tour like that with a prologue time trial, so a really short time trial. And the year I did it, it was starting in a city down south. And my time to go off on this time trial was 10 past midnight. It was just the strangest thing. So I'm there, pitch black. Well, it wasn't pitch black. There are lots of lights and that kind of stuff. But middle of the night thinking, why am I doing a time trial at midnight? That's probably the strangest thing.
Wow.
How'd you do? We got to know now. How did you do?
Not very well at all.
Well, that's got to be intimidating when you don't know exactly what's ahead of you per se, right? You don't want to quite go as fast as you can.
Was
I
it
don't
like
know.
an urban course, so it was pretty well lit, so that wasn't an issue, or did you get into the country?
No, it was an urban core, so it was pretty well lit, but it's this old Italian city, and in the middle of old Italian cities, it's all cobblestones and God knows. So it did feel a bit dangerous, but I was never a really good time trial person. I was more of a climber, so yeah, I wasn't happy.
So I got one more for you. I'm just curious. When was the last time you had a McAussie burger that has beetroot in it from good old McDonald's? And let me just say before you answer that, I'm sorry. Another thing that we, shipped around the world and
Oh, McDonald's just generally.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I have never had a McAussie burger. Never.
That makes
Never.
two of us, sister. I don't know that I would do it either.
I can give you one little anecdote though about beetroot, is that we had our Australia Day celebration towards the end of last week, and I went to buy some beetroot, not because it was Australia Day, just because I wanted some beetroot, and you could not find it in the supermarkets. It had like shelves cleared out. Interesting. anyway.
Why was there a run on beetroot?
I think because it's a bit of an Australian thing to put beetroot on burgers and that kind of thing. I don't know.
I'll have to find a recipe for that. I got one just for scale because I think in the United States we don't understand how big Australia really is. What's the flight time from Sydney to Perth?
5 hours.
Yeah.
It's much closer for me to go to New Zealand than to Perth.
So that's like New York to LA for
pretty much. The time difference is about 3 hours as well. So yeah, it's a long way. Actually, I found out an interesting fact the other day. It's closer for people who live in Perth to go to South Africa than to Sydney.
Oh gosh. Yeah. There you go. All right. Tune into this show and you get burger advice and flight recommendations, and you never know. So,
and a geography lesson.
Yeah, and a geography lesson, and go party with ACDC, kids. That's the best way to go.
Oh, King Gizzard.
Or well, yeah, that's a whole other issue. So, Jennifer Kent, Senior Research Fellow at the University of Sydney School of Architecture, Design, and Planning. We thank you so very much for giving us lots of your time and discussing this really incredible and powerful issue. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me.
All right. So to our listeners, just a reminder, head on over to the website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast. Like, subscribe, and hit us up with an email. To my fellow commissioners, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate it, and we'll keep on doing our thing, and see you next time. Hey, everybody. Commissioner Danley here. Would you like to see more? Hear more? Well, we got you covered. Go to our website, www.theplanningcommissionpodcast.com. It's got everything you want. Guests, yep, past episodes, the video, the audio, even our whiskey pairing, links to everything about all the people we've had on, books, websites, you name it. It's unbelievable. If you want to reach out to us, please. We'd be more than happy to chat. You can email us, planningcommissionpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to tweet at us, go for it, @planningcommish. We're also on YouTube with the Planning Commission Podcast channel, Facebook. Heck, send us a carrier pigeon if you need to. We'd love to hear from you about ideas, guests, you name it. Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. We'll keep doing our thing. You keep doing yours. Have a good one.